Um, my name is Aria Costa. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I'm the Behavioral Health Equity Specialist for the South-Southwest MHTTC. And MHTTC is a cool acronym that stands for Mental Health Technology Transfer Center.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm Ana Hernandez. My pronouns are she, her, ella. And I am the program coordinator for Girasol, Texas, here at the Texas Institute for Child and Family Wellbeing in the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at UT Austin. And I am really looking forward to sharing some of my experiences working with folks in different detention centers and in the community, and thinking about how we can do this work in a trauma-informed way. Yeah. So Dr. Bruce Perry specializes in working with children who have experienced trauma. And he developed this format of the 6 R's as a way to kind of condense ideas about how to work in a trauma-informed way into an easier to remember kind of strategy. And so we'll just go through these. I'll kind of explain like what I know about them, and then I think we'll be talking about them in the context of working with children at the border, right? Awesome. Yeah, so one of the first ones is being relational. And that's the idea of how we connect with each other and the idea of building safety. Sometimes I like to say in the immigration world, because there's so much uncertainty and trauma, instead of thinking about building safety, sometimes we can think about a sense of well-being or a respite. Because total safety might not be possible, but it's trying to kind of create an environment that makes us feel a little bit more at home. That's so important. Being relevant is a lot about, what is this child's age or their developmental age, which is not always the same, right, as their actual age. And it's really about attuning to and matching the individual that you're working with, looking at nonverbal cues, making sure that what you're doing really resonates, right, with them. Being repetitive or pattern or predictable is so important because one of the main features of trauma, right, is that it's unpredictable. We can't prevent it from happening. And so anytime we can like start the conversation or end the conversation with the same phrase or in the same way, that creates the expectations that are consistent and allow us to make sure that what we're doing is expected instead of an unexpected or alarming kind of thing that happens again, right? Being rewarding is a lot about being, having a positive experience or experiencing something pleasurable, which of course is also very opposite to trauma. A lot of these are exactly opposite. And so, that can be everything from like being a mirror to reflect back someone's awesome strengths or something they do really well, or sharing how much you enjoyed the time that you spent with someone or with a kiddo, just like that you really enjoyed playing a game or that they're really good at something, just kind of like saying that out loud. When we're talking about being rhythmic, again, that's the idea that kind of goes with repetitive for me a lot of the time. So that can be everything from like just, the way that you're feeling grounded before you even go into the conversation with a kiddo, making sure that you're doing okay, right? Because that's like the first step. We know that we kind of borrow each other's nervous systems. And so if yours is okay, then they can like kind of feed off of that and feel calmer. So like the first thing I always say is like start it with us. And then also even something that's rhythmic and repetitive, like throwing a ball back and forth or bouncing a ball back and forth, something like that is exactly the type of activity that just like really soothes our nervous system. So we can keep that in mind, use really simple tools to do that. And then lastly, being respectful, right? We all want to be respectful, but in this case, we're talking a lot about, again, that individual person's unique experience, their cultural background, their language, making sure we're not making assumptions and we're always really listening about, their perspective. So those are the 6 R's in a nutshell. And Bruce Perry just has awesome work that y'all should check out.
I really like this. And our last conversation, we kind of were reviewing all of this and just talking about our own experiences. I'm an asylum seeker myself, and although I have a particular experience, of course, it certainly cannot be generalized to all the asylum seekers or all the different countries that we come from. I think we discussed a lot, and just as we're doing today, I think we kind of grabbed five ideas or suggestions that are also based on this trauma-informed work that we want to share with y'all. So I think the first one is based on being relational, repetitive. I think it's super important.
I think the piece around just naming what I'm doing is crisis work, right? And knowing that can already shift something, right? Because it is always so helpful to be able to validate maybe your experience as staff or volunteer, whatever your role is, of the feeling of crisis or things being really hectic or quick moving or overwhelming, And so when you think of it as, we're kind of doing this short-term crisis work, we're going to talk later about, like, I think band-aids as kind of a metaphor. And I think here it's like, okay, so what's the most I can do in the smallest amount of time? And how can I, make sure I set myself up for success by not seeing this as something that's kind of beyond the crisis work, right? At least in the moment. So, yeah, the idea of like orienting, right? So, introducing yourself, making sure you clarify your role, what you can and can't do. And that includes not making promises. I think a lot of the time we want to tell kids that they're going to be okay. We want to tell kids they're going to be with their family or like something reassuring, especially I think it's hard to see children who are separated from family members, right? And that's where, again, like I think a theme we're going to talk about over and over today is just remembering the agency and autonomy and self-determination of these youth and saying, they've made choices and they've like made these trips and they're super resilient and of course need lots of support. Um, but also it's important to not kind of see see them as victims in that way. And so sometimes it's that, like, I think it's that kind of achy feeling of wanting to protect that comes from a good place that makes us like overpromise or say something that we don't know to be true. And so like watching that for ourselves and taking care of ourselves so we can keep some of that perspective is, I think, really important.
What about this one? I think that really connects with what you said, and just manage expectations and just have a clear purpose. I think when you kind of start thinking of that you want to make a change or you want whatever reason that you are um, working, what's guiding you or leading you to have this do this type of work. I think checking the purpose is really important too. I mean, you're probably gonna for that particular person and that at that time for that particular kid, having you there could be important, like a really major change, but
Mhm.
they're going to go away. They're going to, probably going to be there for a specific time. And although your, intentions are wonderful, it can be overwhelming. So taking purpose is very, very, very important. I love this question that we have, like, how can I make this kid less scared in the next few seconds? If I'm going to talk to him or her or them, like how um, just that few seconds, that few little interactions I'm going to have instead of like, oh, I'm going to change the immigration system. I'm going to be able to reunite this children with the families. It's
Mhm.
handling that. I think it's very important. We were talking about like the idea of if you have these higher expectations, like to fix a fracture, like a bone fracture with band-aids, although band-aids can be super important and like, of course, they help. It's not really realistic to think that the band-aid can actually fix that. So kind of like having that, I think it's very important too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think this idea, like we have research on the fact that a very short interaction can make a big difference in someone's life, right? We know that. And so I think both, it's kind of holding two things, right, at the same time. One of them is a small interaction can have a big impact, and I shouldn't diminish that. At the end of the day, when we're in crisis mode or panic mode, and I would recommend like slowing down as much as you can as well, but it can feel like, did I do anything? Like, did I really make a difference today? So it's good to remember that those small moments can make a big difference and that the place for some of these like bigger changes is elsewhere. So you can use this experience to advocate. You can use this experience to get involved in other, movements around changing systems. But like you said, kind of really having clear what is my purpose and what is my role here, those together, I think, allow us to have less of that feeling at the end of the day of like, did I have an impact? Because of course you did, but we have to see it in that particular way, I think.
Ah, yeah. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people who do probably, I don't know, it's been interesting for me too as well, like to understand the what people call immigrant trauma or immigrant stress. Uh, you feel it in so much different ways, but it starts, I think, even with the idea of like leaving your home country, even if it's a decision with like your family or if you're yourself, if you're a young person and just want to leave for whichever reason it is, the trauma starts not only with the situation that you're having in your country, but the idea of leaving your home. And not only your home, but you're going to go into this terrifying new place. And the idea of,
Mhm.
I don't know anything about this. I don't know anybody. I don't know the language. I don't know the traditions.
Mhm.
I'm going to be seen as this outsider coming in. So it's like just when the thought of leaving starts, uh, it starts a whole new process of detachment. I mean, it's very traumatic itself, um, just way before being in the facility right now. So I think understanding that it's not just what's happening at the moment, um, that it's a process, and this, especially with asylum seekers, I know that because every immigration's there's like different types, right? Different scenarios, different applications that you can
Yeah.
submit, but being an asylum seeker gives you like this pending situation that you don't get established until I don't know how many years it can pass. So even if you are they granted you the case and you're waiting for the physician, you can be in a new country for years and years and years trying to live and try to rebuild a new life. And at any time or point, you're going to probably could be sent back, or you could probably have this new other traumatic legal experience going on. So this particular population, as I am, it's like this feeling of you're never stable. So the idea of providing any type of security, any type of grounding,
Mhm.
any type of, yeah, that's a lot.
Predictability.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
Yeah, and I think too, if you're working in a center, it's important to know that you can have all the best intentions, but that even just being in a place that you can't leave can be really hard for folks, especially children or youth who have been very independent on their migration journey. And that's part of why I think seeing these youth as being having their own autonomy and agency is so, so key. Because when you have migrated and done all of this by yourself and you're
Mhm.
14 or whatever age, and then all of a sudden, all these adults are trying to tell you what to do
Mhm.
and take care of you and treat you like you're young or whatever that is, I think that can be really jarring. And so, just kind of thinking of that kind of context, everyone's experience is different. And so, thinking of that, holding some of those contexts in mind when you want to connect and be predictable and bring all these 6 R's in, I think is really helpful for balancing the desire to support and the need for connection and support with the reality of independence and also possibly of a lack of trust that's very well deserved based on someone's past experiences of migration.
I like this too as well. Like, don't ask about immigration or trauma if you don't need to. You don't have to connect with people knowing their stories. You don't want to be traumatized. You don't want to connect in that way, and it's not really
Hmm.
necessary sometimes. I love finding other ways of including games, stories, and the clear relationship. Oh, we are talking about this, and I love how there's obviously a need to start connections in this new place that you are. And depending, you can be there for a day or a month. I don't know how long
Hmm.
you're going to be there, but it's part of, the idea of having some security and some stability. It will take you
Yeah.
to try to connect with people. So be mindful of that. You're going to be there just for a short term of time. You don't want to re-traumatize people, like try to detach them again from another person that they connect with. um, just being mindful of that, and for yourself too, because of course people you want
Mhm.
to help, and then this person's going to leave, and probably you won't be able to follow their story afterwards. um, yeah, keeping that in mind is really important too.
I think so much work in immigration work from the side of people of any side of it is
Mhm.
like living with uncertainty. Like you spoke to that about the process of asylum, but even like trying to do any work within immigration, what I've found going into detention centers and other spaces, holding uncertainty is so uncomfortable, but that's part of kind of naming that this is crisis work and that this is uncertainty and that that's kind of what we are living with until we do change these systems. And so the more we can be prepared for that, have rituals around that, rituals around the grief and loss you experience in this work. What do you do every time you leave the center that allows you to, take some of that separation, hold the grief somewhere, like writing it down, putting it in a box, all of these kinds of good strategies that are going to allow you to also like be your whole self too, just like we're hoping that these youth can be their whole selves in interactions with you.
Ooh, so so part of the work that I do is training in like cultural humility and responsivity and all of this, and I always want to be mindful of reminding people that, of course, is very important, to kind of like understand where people come from and like the idea of having different cultures and value systems and all this. Because you're gonna be, working and interacting with people from different countries at the same time. However,
Mhm.
I think there's like two things that are really important. It's first, I mean, it's really impossible to have a clear understanding of all different countries. There's so many different realities, not only within the people that you're going to meet, but within the different countries. So we kind of like to generalize a little bit in like Latin America,
Mhm.
like people from different, from the South, and we have these different values and different cultures. It's so many diversity within the diversity that you might be learning a particular thing, but it's not really going to work for that populations. So there's so much, and especially it's not only Spanish, right? Like you have Spanish, you have Portuguese, and you have all different indigenous languages. Like there's so many different and rich culture around it. So it's really hard. And adding that to the reason why they left, like the reality, like social, political, economical realities of the country, are very
Mhm.
diverse as well. Um, and I think this is very key, especially for um, people looking for asylum they're looking for asylum, it's because they had to leave the country for a specific reason. And sometimes the reason can be a cultural value from there, like can be part of a cultural traditional dynamic that they left. So trying to replicate that can be very, very harmful. So just being, I don't know, thoughtful about that. Like that could be part of what, to consider. It's very important.
Yeah. Yeah, that piece around kind of asking yourself, do I have an expectation or assumption about this particular youth based on a previous one I spoke to, or a training I took one time, or a country I visited or lived in, or somebody I know in my life, right? Even my parents, right? If you have a personal immigration story yourself, just being aware that there's so many different perspectives and backgrounds and stories. And not all migrants are from Latin America. A lot of these youth probably are, but there's a lot of migrants from different countries in Africa and Asia, and we've worked with so many folks over the years who don't have the kind of traditional stereotypical narrative that the media shows us of who a migrant is. And that's just so important to remember, just the vast diversity. There's also like Afro Latinx folks, and there's LGBTQ folks from Latin America. I mean, there's so many different backgrounds and perspectives. And so, kind of, you can know what you know, but then setting aside some expectations and saying, who is this individual in front of me? And how can I connect with them specifically is at the end of the day kind of a good goal for each interaction.
So last thing, remember they're more than asylum seekers. There's like we were talking about, like how important it is to keep in mind that trauma is not happening right now, and it's important to have like the context of what happened before, and we can probably what could happen afterwards. And it's not just
Hmm.
a crisis work that you're doing because something's happening at the moment, but also that we're more than that. I usually get very uncomfortable with the idea of this is part of who I am and this is my identity too, but there's so much more than that. That's the idea of like, you know, englobing everybody as like these people who are just suffering, right? And they're going through a lot, and that's all that they are. Um, it kind of blinds you and gives you just one single story of them. Uh, it, it limits you to not only connect with people, limits you on like your understanding of people are like entirely human, like there are other good and bad things, right? So I think it's really, really key to remember. And I love your this recommendation of it.
Yeah, it's like a really simple, I'm all about kind of like simple things we can do that make a big shift. And so I absolutely identify with the idea of like feeling hopeless maybe about a situation, or kind of feeling sad because you know someone has been through something really hard. And that's normal, and that's part of empathy. And like the fact that you care is actually a really important thing you're bringing to the work. But in social work, we talk a lot about the idea of being strengths based. And so, something that I find really helpful whenever I'm worried about someone I'm working with, or you know, someone that I met at a detention center or something like that, is I'll try to get myself to think of the 5 things that I know about them that are strengths that they have, or positive things about them. And just the fact that these youth made it here, I mean, that says so much about their resilience and creativity and ingenuity and, you know, the survival, right? And so it's not that we want to, you know, put on a pedestal like trauma, or having to survive, but it's more about saying, ah, this kid was so funny, or you know, oh, that other, you know, girl that I worked with was like so creative and was like drawing everything, and all the things, right? Or that other, you know, youth that I worked with was always like checking in with all the other ones and like seeing how they were doing and kind of like making sure they had what they needed, or getting band-aids from the place or whatever, right? And so it's like remembering to see people not just as the suffering that has happened, but in the strengths, right? In their whole selves, like you said, not just as people who have suffered, but as people who have had and will continue to have entire lives beyond that. And so all of us have our unique qualities that are really special about us. And so seeing them, reflecting them back to people, and really internalizing that for yourself, it can shift your entire feeling in your body from doing this work, in a way that allows you to keep doing it moving forward. Because at the end of the day, that's what we want for you. We want you to be able to keep supporting folks and be okay through it, and continue to do this really important work, and you know, use that experience to continue supporting immigrants here and elsewhere.
So well said. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today in this conversation. We hope that it was helpful, and we, of course, we can continue to talk. If you want any more resources or you want to contact Anna or myself, these are general websites and emails, and just you can reach out to us. Thank you so much for what you do. Take care of yourself and continue to do the awesome work that you're doing.